Hey, it's Dustin with the Davidson Group here. I've got a new segment that I'm going to be launching called Ask a Realtor. This is just a short little snippet of what that's going to look like. But the goal is to create engagement with my community, you all, and answer your questions without any pressure, without any need to feel like you're calling a realtor. Future videos will be live videos. We'll post the schedule for that and give you all updates. But this week, I really just wanted to dive into a common question that I get with almost every single buyer I come across, and it's about earnest money and what that is, right? So let's go ahead and jump in. Earnest money, as defined by Forbes, earnest money is something that buyers provide. So buyers provide a deposit meant to signal their intent or good faith to buy a home. Just pure and simple as that, right? That's what earnest money is. It's held by a third party, and here in the state of Missouri, that third party is typically a title company. The title company will hold that, and then at the purchase or at the closing, it is applied to the purchase price at closing. And so the question then comes into is, what is earnest money? And how will I know if I get to keep it, or in the event of if we don't make it to closing, who gets that earnest money, right? That's always the follow-up question. What happens to that money? In the state of Missouri, you have to have both parties mutually agree upon where that money goes. So what I will typically tell a buyer or a seller is that earnest money is just that. It's held in earnest. It's held by the third party, the title company, or the escrow agent as it's listed out in the contract. And that money isn't the buyer's and it isn't the seller's during the transaction, right? It's the transaction's money, more or less. And so if that transaction falls apart or doesn't close and the buyer doesn't get to retain that based off of those terms, then you guys have to decide. Like I said, that decision is done through a piece of paper, a form called a mutual release. And it just lays out, hey, this money goes to this party, or this money is divided up to these parties. And it's signed by both parties, turned into the escrow agent or the title company, and that money is then dispersed from there. So then that leads into almost inevitably the third question, which is, well, what happens if the buyer or the seller doesn't agree on how that money should be dispersed? Well, that then comes the tricky part, right? What's going to happen to that money? And there's three pieces or three things that can happen. Again, the money, I guess four things. If you all agree upon it, the mutual release is signed. But the three other things that could happen is there's a civil action that is filed to determine the disposition. So someone else decides through that court or through that civil action. The second thing is a court order or a final judgment could mandate the disposition of that money. And then the third thing, which is just a default, is the disposition happens based off of the required by law in the area. So there's time frames that come into these things, and in my career, I've never run into civil action to a court order or disposition by law. But what ends up happening is the escrow holder will hold that money, and the way that it reads out in our contract is this. It says the escrow holder is hereby authorized to report and deliver any such monies to the state treasurer at the time following 60 days after the initial projected closing date. So 60 days is the time frame in which they can. 365 days is typically the date that they adhere to. So say, for instance, in today's world, you are entering into escrow, you're entering into under contract status on December 3rd or December 1st and supposed to close on December 31st. Well, let's say that the contract falls apart for whatever reason. Maybe it's inspection related, maybe it's appraisal related, maybe you were supposed to have a job transfer and it didn't go through, right? Whatever the case may be, and the contract falls apart on December 15th. Well, on December 30th or 31st is the projected close date. So 60 days after that is when the escrow holding or the escrow holder, which is the title company in this case, can decide how that money is dispersed or that it goes back to the treasurer for the state. They typically will wait 365 days and then it'll go back to the state automatically, or they typically just send it up. Now you can file, there's rules of how it's laid out and who pays for what and how that works. In most cases, an agreement can be reached in a couple of months if there's a lot of tension or frustration. But as a buyer in the state of Missouri, there are actually multiple places within our contracts that read that earnest money, the mutual release should be signed and earnest money returned to buyer. right? So as a buyer, our contracts really weigh heavier towards a buyer in our state. This is our state specifically, so I'm not talking about Kansas, I'm not talking about Oklahoma, I'm not talking about California, I'm talking about specifically for the state of Missouri and the Missouri Realtor forms that we utilize throughout our board or our association of realtors. Anyways, a short little episode here today, just about earnest money. Hopefully you learned something. Hey, if you have a question regarding real estate, feel free to reach out between now and the next episode. I will cover it on the next one. Again, we'll be hoping to go live on those so you can ask on the spot. DM, text, email, whatever modality is preferable to you. Thanks again for watching. Hopefully you learned something. This is Dustin with the Davidson Group signing off. Have a good day.